again, what really disturbs me about capitalism is we allow it, like Andrew said, to become the identifying trait of a human being. It becomes the worth of a human being. So all of your dignity, all of your integrity, all of your sacred worth as a creature of God is now based upon this one feature. How much money do you have? How big is your house? How successful are you?
We've all heard Matthew 25's parable of the talents like it's tithe day, and you're being guilt-tripped into giving more for extra blessings. Don't waste your gifts. Be productive. Take risks. Hustle for the kingdom. Somewhere along the way, Jesus apparently became the Dave Ramsey of the first century. But when you actually read chapter 25 of the Gospel of Matthew, the story gets uncomfortable pretty quick. What if this parable isn't about faithful investing at all? What if Jesus is holding up a mirror to a system built on fear, extraction, and endless accumulation? A system where the people who multiply wealth are praised, and the person who refuses to play along gets thrown into the darkness, where there is gnashing of teeth. Because let's be honest, a couple millennia later, that logic still feels pretty familiar. We are left with an important question all of us should struggle with. Maybe the third servant isn't the villain we've always been told he is. I'm Mark Flower, and today we're talking with Rev Jerry and Andrew Bridgeman. Rev Jerry Butler holds degrees from LeTourneau University. Yep. He has a B.A., M.B.A., and Perkins School of Theology at SMU. He has an M.Div and a summa cum laude from there. For the past 15 years, he has served United Methodist congregations as educator and pastor with research interests in early church history. St. Augustine, Koine Greek, and Eastern Orthodox Christianity. He is currently the pastor of education and formation at St. Andrew UMC, but by the time this episode releases, he will be positioned in Montana. Andrew Bridgeman is an elder in full connections, serving as the developer of Mountain Sky Trekking and co-pastor of the Roaring Fork Church. He is also an avid outdoorsman, theologian, coffee lover, and eco-spiritual writer. He is involved with Yarrow Trail Co., where he embraces nature, community, and the sacred. Thank you both for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. And is there anything that I may have missed in that whole intro for you guys?
I think you covered it.
Covered it pretty well.
That's it.
So, of course, we'll be talking about Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, where there are three servants and they're given money. And I was inspired to do this episode. Of course, we've been talking about recording for a little bit now. Mm-hmm. I was really inspired by your sermon that you gave. It was about a month ago or so during this whole sermon series that's going on. And I was just so inspired by what you said. And it really made me kind of rethink this whole parable because I'd never really given it that much thought before. I just thought of it as a traditional way of thinking about it, as put more in, you get more out, sort of thing. And if you fail to do that, then you're somehow being a bad Christian, sort of thing. So I gotta say thank you for giving me this different perspective on it, and rethinking how I kind of view the Bible in this way. So. Thank you for that. And then, of course, you're an intelligent person, and you bring a lot to the table, and you guys are really good friends. So I thought it was really cool when you suggested to bring on Andrew as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So should we jump into this first question?
Let's do it.
And I kind of loaded these questions, so hopefully it isn't too much here. But So Thomas Kuhn said that a paradigm shift becomes necessary when the previous paradigm becomes so full of holes and patchwork fixes that a complete overhaul, which once looked utterly threatening, now appears as a lifeline. For many Christians, our view of God is based upon a reward or a punishment paradigm. There is a Sufi-inspired story, which is coined the angel with the torch and the pail, that poses an interesting question. If there was no heaven to gain and no hell to avoid, what would faithfulness look like? Mm-hmm. Richard Rohr said that operating with love as the source, not fear of punishment or even promise of reward, is a radically different Christian paradigm. To do this takes an experience of love with the infinite one. Then it must be love for everybody. Thomas Kuhn calls this new paradigm the model revolution. Essentially, if we want to see a paradigm shift happen in our lifetimes, we must not only ask, what are we shifting away from? But what are we shifting to or toward? What is this new paradigm? So if building a better future by asking these types of questions requires a vision, what will inspire a new paradigm shift, and how do we get others to see this new vision?
I mean, it's a great question. And I do think it requires maybe a little bit of a paradigm shift for people to see things. What's interesting to me is that in the early church, this is how it was understood. I mean, this is how people operated. And we see the model for this in Acts 2, where everybody is operating on this idea of abundance and God's love and sharing everything that they have. And the early church fathers and mothers kind of expounded on this and tried to build communities around this, especially St. Augustine, as he talked about, the order of love and disordered lives and all of that kind of stuff. So for me, what's interesting is it does require maybe a paradigm shift in the modern age, but it's almost a paradigm shift moving backwards to reclaim something that has been lost along the way. And I think, I don't know what Rev. Andrew thinks, but for me, and we've talked about this a lot, I think the one most impactful thing that we can do is to truly model this behavior inside of our communities. Despite what other people may say, or despite the naysayers and all the criticisms and all the what ifs, I think moving forward with a positive outlook, like really believing in the abundance and not operating on the theory of a zero-sum game all the time. I think if we can model those behaviors, and if we can center our ministries, especially ministries of outreach around this, I think that's going to be what the world needs to see, that this can be done. I think so often we don't do things because we're just afraid they're going to fail. Are we, there's no way we can ever do that. And it's only when we see somebody do it that, oh, well, maybe that is possible. And so I think we have to create church environments. We have to encourage our congregants and our people to take these risks along with us, and to understand, sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not going to work so well. But that doesn't mean that it's the end of the day. It just means that we're going to make some adjustments, and maybe we're going to refocus a little bit, but we're going to keep moving forward with this idea that there's enough. There's always enough. There's always another day. That we're not going to operate on systems of scarcity anymore. And to me, that's what really drives a lot of the fear. It's this idea of scarcity, that there's not enough, that we have to close ranks and keep a really close guard on what we have, because if we use it all up on the wrong things, there won't be anything left. And, from a faith perspective, that's just not what we find in the gospel accounts when it comes to God's love and abundance and provision. So for me, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take communities stepping out and really operating under this paradigm, and showing people that, it's going to be okay, that we can do hard things and it's going to work.
Well, one of the things that I so appreciated about your sermon is that you are taking something that's been interpreted in a very dominant and singular fashion, and you are telling a different story. I think, as we've discussed in our Reading the Faith book group, part of what moves us forward is our ability to imagine, to create, and to share a new story. There's a book that I read. It's called The Religion of Whiteness, and the authors, Glenn Bracey and Michael Emerson, write, "To move our nation toward healing and justice, that becomes clear. We must tell stories, good, improper stories, stories that inspire, stories that connect, stories that address trauma, stories that draw us to ultimate truth, and stories that invite and celebrate sacrificial acts." And I think the way that you connected your sermon to a reality that all of us are experiencing And instead of kind of doubling down on that reality and calling it good and right and true, you flipped it on its head and said, maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Maybe this isn't what this is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are the kind of stories that we need to tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really wanted to lead with this question because the way we're going to be looking at Matthew 25 and this parable of the talents is because you kind of do have to have a paradigm shift from the normative, from what's been created and is the norm in modernity, and it's just we have to kind of discuss how do we view things differently. And how do we do this in a productive way so that we can all understand and we're not talking over each other, we're talking with each other. Mm-hmm. And it's just so important to do when nowadays, it's social media, everybody's talking mm-hmm. at each other, talking over each other, and there's very little communion with each other. And it's nice to be able to do this in person too, because most of my recordings are online and whatnot. There's a few that I do in person, but it's so nice to be able to do this. And I feel like it's something that's lost. And something that I would like to do more. I need to find more people within my area and find time to actually get out and set my gear up and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just so important to do that, and I really appreciate your responses on that too. Mm-hmm. Like I knew when I wrote these, you guys would have something good to say, and so I like the quotes and everything like that. So
thank you.
Why don't we jump into Matthew 25? Now, you were the one that gave the sermon. Do you want to give like a quick recap, just like a elevator pitch of like what the story of the parable is about?
Yes, I mean it's a story that we've heard 100 times probably, and there's a businessman who goes away on a trip of some sort. We're really not told why he goes away, and he has 3 servants that he entrusts with his estate, if you will. And to one he gives 3 talents, to one he gives 2, and then to finally his 3rd servant he gives 1. And I want to note that in the story, this is something people often miss. It's kind of a miss with the English language. When we think the word talent, we think of like sports figures and, stuff like that. And he's got a lot of talent. But really, in the early church, in the early world, a talent was a monetary denomination, and it was an extraordinary sum of money. And so 1 talent is worth probably 20 years worth of wages. And so even the servant that got 1 talent, this had nothing to do with his abilities. 1 talent is an extraordinary sum. And so he gives them the money, and 2 of the servants go out and participate in the monetary systems of their day, and they do well. They double their money. The guy that has 3 now has 6. The guy that has 2 now has 4, right? They double their money. And the guy who has 1, he takes his talent, and for some reason, he buries it in the ground. And at the time, we get no indication why he does this. He just immediately buries his talent. And then the master comes back to the house, and the 2 come to him and say, we've doubled your money. Look how good we've done. And he rewards them and said, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. Now I will make you responsible for even more. Right. And then he comes to this poor soul, the 3rd guy. And, he says, you buried it. But the response is interesting because we're never really told about the master. The only thing we know about the master is what this 3rd servant tells us. And he finally says, I knew that you were a harsh man. I knew that you were very demanding. And so I buried your talent, and now I just give back to you exactly what you've given to me, which seems fair. But the master is not happy with this, and he calls him lazy. He says, if you knew I was a harsh man, then you should have at least invested my money so that I would have gained interest on that money, which I always found was interesting because in Jewish tradition, that's usury, and it is forbidden. And even now in the modern world, Jews are barred from charging interest to their fellow Jewish people. And so it's interesting that you have a Jewish text saying, oh, well, you should have collected interest. And so he takes what he has given the man, and he casts the man into darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, and that's the end of the story. And traditionally, we've always heard this story just as you said. When I was in Sunday school, it was don't waste your God-given talents. You know what I mean? Like God's given you these resources, and as an expression of gratitude, you should use them well and not waste them, which seems okay. But what I tried to push in the sermon is that maybe, as easy as that is, it's a little too simplistic. Maybe what's going on here with this servant is he's making a statement. He's simply quietly refusing to participate in the profit systems of extraction and extortion and all of those games. And it's almost like a silent protest. He's just refusing to participate in it. And maybe Jesus, by telling this story, as you said earlier, is not saying anything good or bad about it. Maybe he's exposing the systems for what they are. And he's calling on his people to choose how they participate in these ongoing systems of reward and punishment. And in his time, I almost wonder if his listeners would have understood this. Because in Roman society, it was a society built upon honor. And honor was everything. And honor was kind of exhibited in people's lives through their monetary wealth and their status. And so it was a game of punishment and reward that was very kind of ontologically important for the Roman citizen. And I don't know, I could be wrong, but I do feel like maybe Jesus is exposing this a little bit. And so maybe this third servant is not some lazy you-know-what. Maybe he's just quietly saying, look, thank you for entrusting me with your money. I've kept it safe for you, but I'm not going to participate in this system anymore. And so here you go. And for that very reason, he is cast out. And I felt as I was writing it that this feels very relevant in our time.
Yeah.
And Andrew and I and my wife and I have talked about this a lot. It's interesting the kind of virtues and moral aspects of people that we reward nowadays in our time. And look, I'll say it out loud. This is where I critique some of my evangelical friends, because I can remember a time as a young lad when Bill Clinton and some other people were in power and were exiled and castigated for their offenses, their alleged offenses. And now it just feels like, well, we can just say the quiet part out loud now and nobody seems to care. And the kinds of people that gain office or the kinds of people that win primaries or, and all of this thing, it just seems like this is what we're rewarding now. And the people that are not participating in those systems, or God forbid, critiquing those systems, are looked upon in a very, very negative light. And that's what fascinated me about, maybe looking at this parable in a different way and removing that whole exposure. Now, but I do want to say too, look, I worked in the secular world for a huge corporation for over 3 decades. There's nothing wrong with capitalism. There's nothing wrong with profit engines in our society. They're needed. We need these things. What I think where it goes awry is when we make those systems a priority and we make our performance within those systems our self-worth. And then it becomes everything. And that's when things like identity politics and grievance politics, that's when all that stuff starts to set in. So I think maybe that's the distinction that Jesus is trying to make. I don't think it's a critique against profit systems. I think he's critiquing the way that we're going about doing this and how we're translating what we're doing into our own identities and the kind of characteristics that we're rewarding as a result of that, which I find fascinating these days, actually. Yeah. So.
Andrew, I would love to give you a chance. I'm going to get to the question, and then we'll have plenty. I mean, this question expounds on exactly what you were talking about. So, many of the early church fathers spoke with startling directness about wealth and labor, especially figures like Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, Ambrose of Milan, and John Chrysostom. They consistently argued that excessive accumulation was a form of theft from the poor, and some even condemned economic systems that depended upon inequality and coercion. When those voices are placed alongside the parable of the talents, so Matthew 25:14-30, the story begins to sound less like a celebration of entrepreneurship and more like a confrontation with the brutal logic of extraction. To those who have more will be given. The servant who buries the talent may not simply be lazy. He may represent someone refusing to cooperate with a predatory economy that rewards gain at the expense of others. The text becomes unsettling when read not as a timeless lesson about using your gifts, but as a portion of an economic order where fear, extraction, and endless growth are treated as moral obligations. So if the fathers are taken seriously, should Christians interpret this parable as a warning against passivity within God's kingdom, or as a critique of social systems that demand participation in exploitation just to survive?
Yeah, I think we often hear the first. The first is the predominant interpretation. And I think it is time that we are active in critiquing social systems, right? We are in America's 250th year celebration, a time that is, in many senses, praising all things that are. And yet at the same time, we live in this paradox, right? Where we're in this active war in Iran, where there is just announced ICE is going to be present at all World Cup soccer games, right? So we're living in this paradox. And that's where I felt like in your sermon, Jerry, a real resonance to this idea of the Great Turning. And the Great Turning is an idea developed by Joanna Macy, and essentially it's shifting from this idea of industrial growth society, of one that is predicated on unlimited growth. We're just going to continue with unfettered greed until infinity. And she believes that the third major revolution of human times is one where we are transforming despair and apathy into constructive collaborative action. And right, this is specifically aimed toward ecological and social crises of our days. And she says this, which I really love. She says, the most remarkable feature of this historical moment on Earth is not that we are on the way to destroying the world. We've actually been on that way for quite a while. It's that we are beginning to wake up as from a millennia-long sleep to a whole new relationship to our world, to ourselves, and each other. And I like, Jerry, how you put it earlier, that in many ways this is a return and also a reaching forward into the way our future could be, or to put it in kingdom language, into the way the kingdom will be.
Yeah, it's a great point. I don't know. I really hold this idea. I think somewhere along the way, especially when we start talking about early church fathers and mothers and early church and those things, I think what we always forget is that the early church fathers and their writings and their understandings of the Gospels and ways of life and what Christianity does and what it doesn't do, those things stand on their own. But then when the Reformation comes along, it got twisted a little bit, and it was changed a little bit. And what modern people usually do is they read Augustine or Chrysostom or Maximus or any of them. They read them through the interpretive lenses of people like Martin Luther and John Calvin and Zwingli and even John Wesley, for that matter. But again, the world did take a turn in the 16th century. It took another turn in the 17th and 18th century. From an industrial revolution point of view, it took a major turn in the 19th and 20th centuries. And, it sort of changed the idea of what human flourishing was meant to be. I think the early church understood, and the early church fathers understood, that human flourishing simply means that when the waters in the bay rise, everything rises with it. So whatever I'm doing connects to everything else around me. And whatever God's love is, it is an all-encompassing love. So that whatever I'm doing affects what Andrew is doing, what you're doing, Mark. We need all of these waters to rise. But then when you start getting binaries of success and failure and profit and loss and this great turning, this great extraction, unlimited resources, then that's a significantly different shift. And then when you couple individualism on top of that and this rampant consumerist model that blossomed through the late 20th century, it throws all that in reverse and reverses it. And, I mean, look, let's be honest about the Christian church. We want our people to be successful because then they write big checks to our church and we can keep doing God's work. You know what I mean? And so sometimes I think that we inadvertently, we encourage this behavior. We try to do that. And I think that's the really thin line that we have to dance, right? Is that there's nothing wrong with people making money and being successful and doing all those things. I think what the Gospels are really concerned about, what the early church fathers were concerned about, and mothers, they were concerned about the way we were doing these things. They were concerned about what really gives you your identity as a person, right? And this is where Augustine, and I could go on for hours about this, this is what Augustine meant by ordo amor, right? A disordered life with disordered loves causes really bad things to happen in the world. And so the idea is to get these things in their proper order and to maintain your focus on the right things, and so that everything else could fall in line with that. So for me, that's what I think of, right? Is that we just have to figure this out together. But again, I'll say it again, I think we move back to move forward. I think we reclaim this message and understanding and take it forward into the future to build the kingdom of God that was, there all along, but maybe just a little blurred by the disordered world and movements of culture that have happened over the last 100 years, 200 years. So
I moved into this next one here. So modern-day apologists will often lean on the parable of talents as a way to baptize systems of profit and accumulation, hence capitalism. David Bentley Hart, though, has often criticized modern market culture as a system that sanctifies acquisitiveness, a strong desire to acquire and possess, while confusing and conflating the logic of the market and the logic of the kingdom of God, arguing that modern economies frequently reward domination while disguising it as freedom. If Hart is right that such systems form people into creatures of appetite and competition, then the parable raises a disturbing possibility. Is Jesus exposing the violence of exploitative systems by presenting a master whose logic mirrors empire and accumulation? Or has Christian tradition too quickly baptized the master's behavior as divine? And as you can see from my questions, I differ on your view on capitalism a little bit. I'm a little more harsh, but I was kind of a little bit more curious on your guys' take. So whichever one of you wants to jump in on that question.
I think there's both and, right? That Jesus, as Jerry points out, is exposing the violence of exploitative systems. One of the things that I think is really interesting in that parable is there's not an instance of someone losing a talent.
No.
And so often, I think what your question points out is that often people are playing this game, they're joining the economy, they're hedging their bets, and they're losing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is noteworthy that there is nothing in that parable about that. And that is so often the kind of stories that I like that term you use, baptize, that we mythologize in our own nation. Right, we are crowning the people who have made it, right? The billionaires, the celebrities, the athletes, the exceptional. And so I do think there is something to that interpretation that perhaps not including someone who has who has lost a talent or who has gone into debt trying to get their talent back is interesting. And so I do agree then with that second part that we have too quickly baptized it. I think we have too quickly assumed that this parable, that this master must necessarily be Christ.
Yeah.
I think the parable that I more associate with is the parable of the workers coming in from the field.
Oh.
Whether you've worked all day or a half day or just for an hour, you each get your pay.
Yeah.
And what if that was the parable that we lifted up instead of this one?
Yeah. It would probably be faced with cries of injustice and inequity, right? How dare you? I mean, the perfect example, I've always been a big proponent of a flat tax. Like, just everybody's the same. You know what I mean? Like, there's no more tax codes. There's no more tax brackets. It's just all 1% for everybody. And that way, whether you're rich or poor, it's going to be it's going to equalize the system a little bit. It's funny. I mean, look, I'm a little biased because, again, I spent some time in my life in another world where this was a big driver. And I did see a lot of amazing technological advancements as a result of profit. I mean, even looking at this camera and these iPads and the telecommunications network, all that stuff is the result of a profit engine that survived and pooled resources to fuel research and development and to be able to even produce this stuff, to manufacture it in ways that made it cost efficient for you to buy. And so I do think that there are those things. Again, what really disturbs me about capitalism is we allow it, like Andrew said, to become the identifying trait of a human being. It becomes the worth of a human being. So all of your dignity, all of your integrity, all of your sacred worth as a creature of God is now based upon this one feature. How much money do you have? How big is your house? How successful are you? And that's where I kind of get quickly off track with it, and why I tried to present the parable in this way, because I think that's what these systems do when they're left unchecked. And the perfect example, I ask this question all the time: how much money is enough? Like, how much money does one person need? Should there be laws that prohibit any individual in our society from having $100 billion? And if they're allowed to make that kind of money, should there be laws and regulations about what that money is then used for? Right? Like, if you're a centibillionaire, should there be a law that says when you hit this mark, you are now by law required to give 90% of your wealth to this thing, right? Why do we need that? And so I do think you're right, Mark. I think that we have quickly baptized these things. But I don't blame the systems for that. What I would retort to your comment is that capitalism is just an ism. It is just a construct. It is just a system that does exactly what it's designed to do.
And that's
you know what I mean? Exactly. And so we can't necessarily put categories of good and bad on capitalism. What we have to do is we have to recognize it for what it is and for what it produces and the consequences it produces, and then maybe try to put safeguards around that to moderate that system in ways that will create equity and for everyone, and will create consequences that everyone can benefit from, as opposed to concentrating wealth in the hands of a few. It's interesting. So there's a book I'm reading. It's called Nexus. It's about information networks, and it goes back to this story thing you were talking about. And the same guy wrote Homo Sapiens. Yuval Harari, I think is his name. Harari, brilliant guy. But he does talk a lot about what information really is. The power of information is really found in the way that it's networked and the way that these stories are told. And a story that is told with the intent of seeking truth will use different sources of objectivity, like science and all of these things, because it's seeking truth for the betterment of everybody. Networks that are designed to disseminate stories that are meant for control and social order, this is where propaganda comes in and the story is controlled, right? I kind of think capitalism works that same way, right? It is an ism, it is a system, it is a network of information that is turned loose on the world that can produce amazing things, but it can also cause some really, really horrible consequences if it's used in the wrong way. And then when the church steps in and we start putting crowns on people, you know what I mean, and capitulating to these people because of what they can do supposedly for us, or the voices of power that they supposedly have, and then that gets put out as propaganda into these information network, it creates a story that just distorts the Christian message at its source. And I think that's where we're at today. I think that people have to understand the differences in these stories, which goes back to what Andrew was saying. We need to take a turn. We need to exhibit and tell a different story in a different way. But we need to be careful about it because, we live in the real world. And I think if we tell a story that sounds too idealized, we'll just be brushed off as idealistic wishful thinkers. Mm-hmm. So we have to not just tell the story. We have to embody it in ways that make it real for people.
I think one of the things that we've talked about before is that it feels exceedingly difficult in this day and age to imagine a future beyond capitalism. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the creative and imaginative challenges that we have as Christians, as thinkers, as the church, is to try and imagine what that better could be. Now, for me, I'm not necessarily with you on the same page with capitalism. We've talked about this before, but I think it's so ingrained that, we brought this to our reading group. Mm-hmm. People struggle to even say any possible alternative.
Yeah.
And that's where I think I like this idea of the great turning, because we need to begin imagining what those can be. Mm-hmm. We need to reach for better. And we can have different ideas about how that's done, reforming, or by putting some controls in, or a new system. I think there is a reality where we have to admit our humanity is going to lead the systems we create to have faults, but maybe we can continue in this process of reforming, revitalizing, perhaps resurrecting in some cases. Because we look around and there are some people living like King of Kings and other people who are just largely forgotten about.
Yeah.
And I think for us as Christians, the challenge that we have is to not look away, or to not only look in the direction of those who have prosperity.
Yeah. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what we're wanting to do. I mean, maybe we're so immersed in this world, in this system, that even clergy people, right, we tend to look that way. We tend to focus on those folks that have all that stuff, and we start having fantasies about, well, what could I do with all these resources, as if we would do anything better than, the guy that's got $100 billion. I mean, we'd probably fall into those same traps. So maybe that's it. Maybe we need to be bold enough to look a different way. I know one of the things I always try to do with people, if you're sitting in a committee meeting or something and they're going, we just can't do that. That's just not feasible. I'm like, why not? Why not? Get the whiteboard out. Tell me all the reasons why not, right? Because we just so often give up so easily, and we just don't dare to really think that this could be possible. And all I know is that some of the most impactful ministries I have ever participated or witnessed in the church started very small with a handful of individuals that dared to imagine that this was possible. And they just took really small steps, and they would not be detoured. I mean, you think of the greats like Dorothy Day and all the criticism that she faced, but she would not be deterred. She was going, no, this is how we're going to do things. And so I think, that's what we have to do to make this happen. But we have to have patience with it as well, because the realities we face can't be ignored. This is why I really appreciated what Pope Leo recently has done with his first encyclical. He was bold enough to step out into the fray and say, you know what, AI is not a terrible, evil thing, but we need to be really, really careful with this, because it has really, really impactful consequences for us as a people, as humans, as a society, in ways that we've never faced before. And so it's exactly what he was saying. He wasn't demonizing the product. He was just saying, we need to step back and really think about what we're doing here and how it impacts us. So yeah, you need to ask those hard questions.
And that's why I think it's so fun about having a podcast like this, is that I get to talk to people that have different perspectives, that come from different directions, and they're able to input different things. And although we disagree, and like even us two, I mean, I think we have similar views on capitalism and what that looks like. But like between like, us, like, we have different views on that. Like, you still see value in it. I can see value in it, but I think that we really need to dismantle it and come up with something new. But then what does that look like you're talking about?
Yeah.
And to be able to have conversations like this and actually talk about things instead of getting heated, like actually allowing others to talk and express their opinions. And you can say, well, I see where you're coming from, but I disagree. And talking about, the systems of the haves and have-nots, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, exploitative, systems of the people below and the people on the bottom, kind of like we're reading with, Matthew 25 and everything. And I think this kind of goes into the last question here is, how do we decipher whether our causes are just and everything like that.
Yeah.
So the servant's resistance in this passage is striking because it is not driven by outrage, vengeance, or spectacle, but by a calm refusal to participate in a system rooted in fear, just like you were talking about. That posture feels deeply connected to the thought of Augustine of Hippo, who believed that every society is ultimately shaped by what it loves most. For Augustine, the central human problem was never merely bad behavior or corrupt institutions, but distorted love, exactly what you were talking about before. A world curved inward on itself, seeking security, power, control, rather than resting in God. His vision of the earthly city was one built on domination and self-preservation, while the city of God was formed through humility, charity, and rightly ordered desire. In that light, the servant's quiet, honesty can be read not simply as moral courage, but as a refusal to let fear dictate his loves or determine his identity. It also challenges Christians to consider whether their public witness reflects the peace and charity of the city of God, or whether they too easily adopt the coercive instincts of the earthly city while claiming to defend truth. If Augustine is right that we become what we love, then how should Christians discern whether the causes they fight for and the ways they fight for them are actually forming them into people shaped by the love of God rather than the anxieties of power, control, and fear?
Well, I could talk for days about this, but I'm going to let Andrew go.
And I know the time is coming. I'm going to be mindful of that too. Yeah. So, but I'll let you guys talk about that though.
Yeah. So, as part of the Great Turning, Macy and Johnstone provide 3 questions for us, and I think these are good questions to ask to your question, which is when and how are we turning up? What are we turning away from? And what are we turning towards? And I couldn't help but think as we were talking of this poem by Wendell Berry. It's called Manifesto, the Mad Farmer Liberation Front. And if you've ever read his collection of The Mad Farmer, there's a beautiful introduction, essentially, of Wendell Berry being this kind of anti-technology guy that has kind of just become a recluse and turned to his farmer, and they call him mad because he is so different than everyone else. And so this is what he writes as like his manifesto, and I'll just read a very brief section of it. It begins, "Love the quick profit, the annual raise, vacation with pay, want more of everything ready-made, be afraid to know your neighbors and to die, and you will have a window in your head. Not even your future will be a mystery anymore. Your mind will be punched in a card and shut away in a little drawer. When they want you to buy something, they will call you. When they want you to die for profit, they will let you know. So friends, every day do something that won't compute. Love the Lord, love the world, work for nothing, take all that you have and be poor, love someone who does not deserve it, denounce the government and embrace the flag, hope to live in that free republic for which it stands. I just love that as a beautiful, beautiful kind of counter to what we can turn toward.
Yeah.
An alternative that may have people calling you the mad farmer, but one that is present, I think, in a return to way things were before, but also a turn to the way things can yet be.
Yeah. It was always been interesting to me is Jesus repeatedly tells his apostles, people are going to think you're nuts. Mm-hmm. Like he doesn't sugarcoat this. I mean, even in the Gospel of John in 21, which is a sermon I'm getting ready to preach, I mean, he spends a minute telling Peter, look, you're going to be my guy. You know what I mean? You're going to be the rock, but it's not going to be great. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? People are not going to be great for you. And so often I think Christians shy away from that message, right? It's this message of the mad farmer. You know what I mean? Like when you go out and you do something kind for somebody for no reason, when you go out and you are just loving God and all, well, I love the paradox of like, speak against your government, but love the flag. You know what I mean? Like when you do these really weird things like that and you show people you can do both at once, or it just doesn't compute with them in society. And instead of asking the question, why doesn't it compute? And really tackling that hard question, yeah. Right? Like, why doesn't it compute? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We say, oh, well, you're just mad, or you're idealistic, or you're one of those progressive liberals, right? Like, we just kind of gloss over it. And I think we do that because deep down, we know that there's something pure and true about what's happening, but it's so against the grain of everything else that speaks to us. And we just don't want to confront that paradox. Yeah. And so we just brush it off. You know what I mean? And we don't want to do that. And this is why I always ask this question, why? Why not? Why is that important for you? I want to know, like, let's really get down to why you're rebuffing this idea or why this is difficult for you. It's funny. I love TikTok. I have to admit, I love it. I have been so bad that I give myself 45 minutes a night to scroll through TikTok and then I'm done. I have to set a timer. But my feed is turned into, there's this one guy I see and he puts a blindfold on and he holds up a sign and he just stands in the middle of a busy street or a busy sidewalk. Mm-hmm. And his sign simply reads, if you're feeling depressed or have any anxiety, come talk to me and give me a hug. And he just stands there with his arms open. Mm. And he films himself recording it for content. But these people just come to him and they're in tears. Yeah. Or they're sharing and he's just there. He's just there to listen. He doesn't try to fix. He doesn't try to comment. He just says, hey, what's going on? How's everything going?
He's just present.
He's just present. Mm. And then they're there for a minute, and then they just walk on. And some people pass him by, and they look at him like he's got three heads. Mm-hmm. Like, what are you doing? Or they think, oh, he's one of those content guys. He's doing this for likes. Okay, well, okay.
It can still be helpful for people.
Yeah, I mean, he's still doing something absolutely selfless and amazing and loving. And he's like, it's just like this public declaration of this paradox.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, just go do something kind. And even my girls, and I'll end with this, even my girls, when they were little and they were really getting at each other and arguing and getting so frustrated with each other, I would just encourage them, like, just go do something nice for your sister. Mm-hmm. Like, go do a load of laundry for her. Right? Like, go make her some mac and cheese or something, Yeah. And if you don't want to do it for your sister, go do it for someone else. Just go do something kind today for somebody. And 9 times out of 10, it would work. It would kind of reorient them back. And again, I think this is what Augustine is really getting at. Like, you ask, how do we judge these things? Mm-hmm. Well, Augustine is encouraging us over and over again to ask ourselves, what desire is this sating? Right? Because for him, human beings are creatures of desire. We are creatures that walk around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, wanting. And I think if you're really honest with yourself, that's what you do.
Yeah.
From the minute you wake up to the minute you go to sleep, You want something.
Mm-hmm.
And he's constantly asking us, what does that desire point to? What does sating that desire accomplish for me, for the world, for someone else? And I think that's the filter. Because if we're constantly enveloped with pride, if we're constantly enveloped with self-gratification to the exclusion of everyone else, then that's, I think, where he's talking about our loves get disordered and our desires get disordered. And so I think that's just the simple trick. Like, why am I really doing this? What am I getting out of it? And those are really hard introspective questions for some people to ask. And it's not about judgment or condemnation. It's just about honesty. My beloved wife, if she hears this, she'll love it. I mean, I can remember, like, for example, I came home from church one day. Oh, and I was so upset. I couldn't believe that this guy talked to me that way. I couldn't believe he was talking to me that way. And I was so mad and so upset. And how dare he and all this stuff. And she just looked at me and she goes, so why are you mad? Right? Like, what are you really bothered about? And she goes, maybe he had a point. Like, maybe you're just mad because he didn't bend the knee, you know what I mean, and give you the respect that you think you deserve. And it really made me stop and think, like, why am I mad about this? And 9 times out of 10, that woman, I'm mad because my pride and my ego have been hurt. And I feel like I didn't deserve that, you know? And it really, it makes you stop and think, right? Why am I even upset and going on? And it gets back to this question of outrage. I think that a lot. I think that Augustine and others, they're more concerned about how we're doing these things, what the catalyst for these things are, and what desire is it really sating for us. And, you know, I'm sorry, most of the time I do feel like a lot of the outrage and a lot of the anger, it becomes an identity for people, and their whole lives are centered around grievance and what's been done to them or others. And it's destructive. It's destructive because it's corrosive, and it's not the self-giving love of Christ that we see. I see Christ getting upset in the Gospels a couple times, but most of the time, he's just not really concerned about satisfying his own ego. He's more concerned about nurturing life and loving others and doing it in a way that provides a witness that sparks enough curiosity in people to want to be the same way. So, long answer to your question. But like I said, I could go on forever.
Yeah, I know you could go on.
I just read a really interesting book about that. It's called The Augustinian Pastor, and he talks a lot about that.
Which I'm kind of bummed that we haven't done this earlier, because I would love to do like a whole episode on Augustine. I mean, you're not going to be too far away that we can't just do like a digital one.
Of course.
I mean, you're going to be in the area, so I mean, we can connect and do
get
some
you
more
on the screen and we'll do it.
Yeah. But why don't we wrap this up? So if people want to find or hear more about you, obviously you're going to be, by the time this comes out, you're going to be at your new congregation. You are a writer and do all that. So I'll let you guys pitch whatever you guys want to pitch, and then wherever people can find you.
I think the main way to keep up with Andrew and I is we have an amazing book club. It's on Substack, and it's called Reading the Faith. And we pick a book, we do study guides. We usually give people plenty of time to read. There's no stress in the reading and the times. We meet bi-weekly over Zoom for those that want to join in and have a conversation. But it's not a requirement. We have a lot of subscribers, I think, that just kind of follow along with the study guides that we provide. And in addition to that, we try to engage with other content on Substack. We do a podcast before we start reading with a promotional podcast, and then we do a podcast in the middle and a podcast to wrap the book up. And then we have a little writing expose on our thing. It's called He Said, where we'll take a topic from the book we're reading or the chapter we're on, and Andrew will write a 300-word response, and then I'll write a 300-word response, just to try to keep people engaged. And so I think keeping up with both of us, that's the same way. As always, I mean, I'll be at a little church in Montana. Lakeside Community Chapel is the name of the church in Lakeside, Montana, on Flathead Lake in the valley. So I'll have Facebook and all of that stuff, so you can look us up there. And then I also have a Substack. It's called Rev Jerry's Ramblings, where I just post very boring things for people to read. It's more of a therapeutic device than it is anything else. I have to get these ideas out of my head. So that's another way that you can keep up with me.
Yeah, and I am the developer of Mountain Sky Trekking. We create retreats, backpacking trips, excursions for people that are spiritual. So this summer we are going to Yellowstone. We are doing the Four Pass Loop in the Maroon Bells, and we're doing what I'm calling the King's Castle Loop in the High Uinta Wilderness. We have trips planned through the calendar year of 2027. I think there'll be 6 to 8 next year, so that's a great way if you'd like to come along for an adventure and find God in the wilderness. And I do eco-spiritual reflections and liturgies on Yarrow Trail Co., which is on Substack.
Yep. Right on. Well, thanks for digging into this. Like, I loved that we got to dig into this further, because I loved what you said before, like just during, the normal Sunday church sermon, but digging into it further and kind of getting into it and like what other church fathers are saying and digging into more of the nuances of this parable and how it relates to, not even just how it relates to the world, but, parallels and adjacentness and all that kind of stuff. So it's been really fun. It's really fun having
Thank you for having us. Yeah, it's really an honor.
Yeah, and we'll try to talk another time and see if we can do something else.
Sounds fantastic.
Sounds like a plan.
We'll be ready.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.